Lovely. Okay, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And just no, you haven't subscribed to the wrong session. This was last week when we looked at Eve. Cover the mother of all life. We decided that she was not afraid of death, searching for knowledge or wisdom, that she was a heroine. The reason that we were sentient, curious, that she knew her own mind, was hungry for knowledge and pushing boundaries. And the advice that we learned from her was, don't listen to men. Don't be afraid to try something new. Find out for yourself. Act on your own merit. And finally, to call Eve not Eved, but Ezer, which is a nice play on Eve and Eved and Ezer. So not a slave, but a help. And of course, she is Ezer Kenegdo. She is meant to be the help for Adam. I can see there's a chat, but I can't read the chat at the moment. So I don't know if that's something, I'll have to check that one later.
Don't worry, it's not related.
Okay, right. Okay. So trying to work out from that what she used to say, if we're going to follow the Pirkei Avot formula, I kind of came up with these. Seek wisdom even when it is dangerous. Do not fear death. We are equal partners with God, equal partners in creating and creativity. So we are as God, equal partners in creating and creativity. Okay, so if you'd like to change that or alter it in any way, then we can do so. It's certainly not set in stone, but let's see now. So today we are going on to Rebekah, or Rivka, as she's known in Hebrew. And I'd like to start, I don't know if you have the text, if you have the texts, to start with the first one, which actually comes from Pirkei Avot and is somewhat relevant to Rebekah, coming from Avot 5, a very well-known one, that Yosef ben Yochanan of Jerusalem used to say, let your house be wide open, and let the poor be members of your household. Engage not in too much conversation with women. They said this with regard to one's own wife. So how much more so then with regard to another man's wife? From here, the sages said, as long as a man engages in too much conversation with women, he causes evil to himself. He neglects the study of Torah, and in the end, he will inherit Gehinnom. In other words, Gehinnom means hell. You won't make it to heaven. So again, like last week, I'd like you, if you want to make any comments, interrupt at any point, just please, you're welcome to unmute yourself and make your comments. I realize, poor Mark, you at the moment, you're the only man on this call, and I do apologize. So I hope you won't feel got at, that's the only thing. But any comments on the Pirkei Avot? Oh, Alex is there in the background. I can see you now. So good. Right. You're not alone. So, any thoughts, Diz? Okay, Mark, unmute yourself too.
Whenever I read texts like this from antiquity or in the Middle Ages, I want to say, what were you afraid of? You know, what is it about the women that worries you so much?
Yes, I suppose so. I mean, I suppose it comes from a context where men and women's lives were so separate that you would not actually be in a social situation where you talk to another man's wife. unless you were already in an improper situation. And therefore it was dangerous. But I don't know, but it does, we'll see later when we look at Rebekah, it does rather affect some of the comments there, not all of them, because on the whole, the rabbis treated Rebekah with a lot of respect. But there are one or two comments which do relate to this, which we'll look at.
So Emma and I have been reading Pirkei Avot together, and we've got an illustrated version in the form of a comic that Christina kindly got for me. And it's interesting because virtually all of the Pirkei Avot is really applicable, and there's lots of kind of takeaways. You think, oh, that's really good advice. But one of the few ones which comes really early on is that, and there's a little disclaimer in brackets saying this view is no longer acceptable in modern society. Kind of just
yes, not amongst the Haredi it is. Amongst the Haredi it's still very much so. You know, there was, I was reading, I think it was the American Reform Movement's Parashat HaShavua this week, because of course it is this week we will be reading about Rebekah. It's it is part of our portion on Saturday. Who talked about a Haredi man that she knew, the commentator, who had enormous difficulty. One of the hardest things he found when he left the Haredi community and sort of joined secular society was how to talk to women, because he never had. You know, not even his mother or his sisters, because the whole society was not geared to that.
But can I ask, I mean, if we look at like Carol Meyer's work, like modern anthropological work, ethnoarchaeology, really challenges this idea that we can read backwards the separation of the sexes. Like women weren't just veiled and in the house, you know, they had to go to the market, they had to sell things in the market, they had to, you know, so there wasn't like this complete separation that doesn't, you know, isn't possible in those kind of early agricultural society.
Yes, but we're not talking about, if we're looking at Pirkei Avot, you're not talking about early agricultural societies, you're talking about a highly urbanized Roman society where they were. I mean, if you were wealthy, you sent your servants to market, you didn't go out.
I guess my point is just that's such a different context than
absolutely. It's a very bit different. It's a very different context from the matriarchs, and that's the interesting thing. And I mean, you know, and that's why you get some of those comments where the rabbis have a problem. Although, as I say, you know, in most of the rabbinic views or midrashic views, I'm really just looking at Bereshit Rabbah today, which is one of the earliest midrashim. That actually they do like her. They think she's a very good role model, which is interesting because I think quite a lot of what she does today we would think was morally somewhat dubious. So anyway, so if we look at the texts, I mean, there's an awful lot. We couldn't read it really all about Rebekah. So the first story where you know, where we talk about how Abraham charges his servants to find a wife for Isaac, because he does not want Isaac to marry amongst the Canaanites. Ishmael has already done so. So he charges him to go and find a woman back, he says, to the city of his birth, although that's not actually where he goes. He goes to Aram Naharaim, which is the city of Nahor, but it's also known as Haran. Naharaim, Haran, it's kind of, you know, related. And it is the city of Terach. It's where Abraham's brother and family settled. So it was not where Abraham was born, but where Abraham lived when he got the call to leave, Lech Lecha, to leave and to go to Canaan. So Eliezer travels to Naharaim, the city of Nahor, and he prays, and he goes to the well. And he prays there that, you know, that he will find a suitable wife, and that it is the woman who, when he asks for a drink, also offers to give water to his camels, and that will be his choice. And so we can, if you look at the text, we can, we'll pick it up where he actually meets Rebekah. He'd scarcely finished speaking, that's praying to God, when Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with her jar on the shoulder. Now, is there anything unusual you can see in that first sentence?
She's not separate.
Oh, well, you mean that she's connected, they give her family tree?
Well, that and what we were just talking about with the difference between Pirkei Avot and like the world of the matriarchs. Here's a man encountering a young woman.
Ah, I see. Yes, absolutely. And we know she's not chaperoned in any way. And not only that, but, he gives her all sorts of gold and jewels, which seems to be okay. It is a very different society, you're right, from the rabbinic one. But in that phrase too, there's something slightly unusual.
There's a woman mentioned, Milcah, rather than just men.
Absolutely, because you always normally have, the family tree is a male one. So why the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor? Why that rather than just, born to Bethuel, who was the son of Nahor, Abraham's brother? Why mention the wife? Any sort of thoughts or ideas why that might be?
Did he have more than one wife? So it's clarifying which wife?
Yes, it is. Absolutely. And why is that important?
Isn't Milcah the woman mentioned in Genesis 11 when we find out that Sarai is infertile? And isn't she the one who has like a double? Is she married to her uncle?
Yes. Well, she's married. She's married to Nahor. But you're absolutely right. She's mentioned at the same time. It's Milcah and Iscah, who are sisters. And rabbinic texts identify Iscah as Sarah. So that according to Midrash, it's not clear in the text that this is the case, but it's certainly according to Midrash, and all the rabbis pick this up and agree with it, is that Milcah was Sarah's sister.
And the grandmother of Rebekah.
Yes. Okay. So that is giving, a good yichus, a good connection, particularly if you remember the rabbis, insist on a matrilineal line rather than the patrilineal one that you get in the Bible. So it and it's thrown here to say that she is doubly appropriate. Okay. It also, the rabbis would pick up that, the fact that he'd hardly stopped praying to God when absolutely the right woman comes out was not an accident, that this is divine providence. God arranged it all. And again, the rabbis very often, they add to this because of this problem about, nice girls like Rebekah would not normally go to the well in rabbinic society. And they say that she would normally have sent a servant. But she had some divine premonition that she had to go. So that's kind of how it works. But of course, the well becomes a really important model. Who else meets their spice at the well?
Does Jacob meet Rachel at the well?
Yes, he does.
Doesn't Moses meet Zipporah at the well?
Absolutely. Yep. Those are the two. And then actually, if you go into the New Testament, of course, you've got the sort of woman at the well, which becomes a sort of very much a motive on that. And also the story of Ruth, which plays with that, where she's told go near, she gets water from Boaz. She's told to go and drink from the vessels of water. So there's a kind of play there. But what is interesting is that with Jacob meets Rachel, and we'll look at this more next week, he was told by the shepherds that we wait until everybody has arrived, and then we take the stone off so everybody can take water from the well. But Jacob is so overcome when he sees Rachel that he personally himself takes this great feat of strength, takes the stone off the well to give her water. And Moses, when he meets Zipporah and her sisters are being teased and bullied by the shepherds, and he basically chases the shepherds away and protects the women. So both Jacob and Moses take this very macho role. But here it's Rebekah who is taking that role. She fills her jar and then offers to get water for the camels. And you know how much a camel can drink, and there are 10 of them. Professor Jonathan Maganit always says, he's always amused by sort of illustrations you often have of Rachel with a Rebekah sort of very daintily sort of tripping down to the well with this little jar on her shoulder. That's not, if you're going to give water to camels, you need basically huge gallon, buckets to be able to give them enough water. So she was pretty strong, pretty tough, I think. So just to read through it, the maiden was very beautiful, we're told, a young woman no man had known. A young woman, the word is betula, which is usually which is often translated as virgin. And this is where you get the problem of virgin birth, of course, in the Gospels, or the Isaiah prophecy, behold, a virgin will give birth, because the word betula doesn't mean a virgin, it means a young woman just past puberty, basically. And she, again, the rabbis identify her as being 14. Anybody recall how old Isaac is at this age? Is this stage? There's no reason why you should.
40.
He's 40. Yeah. So yes, interesting. Nobody seems to comment on that, but it might explain why maybe later their marriage is not such a wonderful success, which is up for discussion anyway. Okay. So this, so she went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. And the servant ran towards and said, "Please let me sip a little of your water from your jar." "Drink, my lord," she said, and she quickly lowered her jar upon her hand and let him drink. When she'd let him drink his fill, she said, "I will also draw for your camels until they finish drinking." And quickly emptying her jar into the trough, she ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for all the camels. Okay, so the man meanwhile stood gazing at her, silently wondering whether Adonai had made his errand successful or not. And when the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold nose ring weighing half a shekel. I imagine that's quite heavy. I didn't work out what half a shekel is in weight. And 2 gold bands for her arms, 10 shekels in weight. But she'd obviously proved that she was pretty strong by having given all this water, so she could probably wear, sort of carry these really heavy gold bracelets. I don't know if you have any thoughts here at all. Any comments? As I say, interrupt if you do.
Sybil, what is a nose ring? Would she put it on here or?
Yes. I think, I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of Yemenite brides.
Yes.
Very much, or I suppose in sort of Indian culture too, to have a sort of a ring on your nose.
So just like cows.
Well, probably not. Probably be pierced on one side of her nose.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. Okay.
So I don't think it means that she's going to be sort of captured and such. I think it is a gift.
Okay, just an ornament. And one more question, as we're talking about Sarah. I've always wondered that sometimes Sarah is spelled with an H and sometimes without. And I know 2 Jewish Sarahs, one is with an H, one is without.
Yes. Well, it's, I mean, because it's a transliteration. In the Hebrew, it ends with a hey. So technically it should have an H at the end, but it sounds the same whether it's Sarah with an H or without.
Yeah, lovely, thank you.
Okay. So he then carries on, the servant says, "Pray tell me, whose daughter are you? And then, is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" And she replies, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bought in Nahor." And went on, "There is plenty of straw and feed at home, and also room to spend the night." The man bowed low in homage to Adonai and said, "Blessed be Adonai, the God of my master Abraham's house, who has not withheld steadfast faithfulness from my master. For I have been guided by my errand by Adonai to the house of my master's kin." Okay, so basically he is saying, he's praising God in front of Rebekah. And then she runs and told all of this to her mother's household. Why her mother's? Well, there are two possibilities. One is that essentially if her father had many wives, and it seems he was a fairly wealthy guy, each wife would have their own household, their own room or their own tent or their own dwelling. And so she would go to her mother as opposed to one of the other wives of Terah. But there's another theory, which is that he had died. He does turn up in the next sort of few verses, but then he disappears again because all the negotiations are between her mother and her brother Laban, and Terah isn't sort of Bethuel is not referred to more than once. So that some people think that the mention of him where he turns up is a stylistic error in the editing. But Midrash has a really interesting story, which I will tell you when we get there to it. Okay. Now, Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban, or Laban. Laban ran out to the man at the spring, and when he saw the nose ring and the bands on his sister's arms, and when he heard his sister Rebekah say, "Thus the man spoke to me," he went up to the man who was still standing beside the camels at the spring. "Come in, O blessed of Adonai," he said. "Why do you remain outside when I've made ready the house and place for the camels?" I should have said there's a gap. I haven't got the verse numbers here. The maiden have told this to the mother's household, so he runs out. Yes, so he tells this. "So why do you remain outside? I've made ready the place for the camels." So the man entered the house and the camels were unloaded. The camels were given straw and feed, and water was brought to bathe his feet and the feet of the entourage under him. But when food was set before him, he said, "I will not eat until I've told my tale." He said, "Speak then." And so you get in a great sort of, wonderful Oriental sort of oral tradition, the whole thing repeated. So I cut all of that out. But before we go on, what image do you have of Rebekah, and what image do you have of Laban so far?
She's really helpful, and just one of those people who helps strangers. He seems to be quite interested in the gold.
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, I think you don't know much about him, but that's the only thing we're told about him, which basically says it all, I think. Whereas she seems to be genuinely generous. She didn't have to, water the camels, and she did. And she was very open about when he said, "Is there somewhere I can stay the night? Is there room in your father's house?" She said, "Yes, plenty of room, plenty of food, please come." So there seems to be an openness and a generosity, which again fulfills his his requirement that she thinks she's going to be a suitable wife for Isaac.
Are they sort of playing off of one another a little bit, because he's a servant and Rebekah helps him, so she's clearly very hospitable, but then Laban seems to be very interested in like what he can offer him. And then they're also, I mean, the servant, right, asks about her father's house, although gives her the gold first before he's asked who she is.
Yes.
But then she's like, oh, I'll go to my mother's household. I don't know, there seems to be like some opposites.
That's interesting. So you're suggesting that Laban might be part of the father's house, that there's a kind of a tension between the two?
I don't know. They definitely seem to be kind of set up against one another, as opposed to, oh, this is her brother. You think, oh, maybe they're the same cut of the same cloth, but actually they don't seem to be at all. Laban almost seems like a foil.
Yes, I think that's very much so. But then, of course, everybody knows what happens in the future stories. You know, nobody's coming to this. And even when it was written, everyone knew, you know, Laban is the one then who tricks Jacob in later. So, you know, he's probably set up from the start as being, yes, very much the baddie, as opposed to Rebekah.
I wonder, because if some strange man started talking to my 14-year-old sister, I would be, the way it's phrased is quite weird, the way it's like it runs out and then suddenly he sees the gold, as if he was going to say, what are you doing?
Yes.
Or check him out, and then once he sees the gold, he's happy.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the same in the Hebrew, because I haven't got the Hebrew to hand.
No,
sorry.
no, it is pretty much the same. But she's already gone back. I mean, there's a slight problem in that, you know, he must have seen the gold when she ran in.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And so there's this kind of, you know, not quite sure chronologically how this works, but it does definitely seem to be, you know.
But has she taken it? He takes it, he took it, but does he give it to her when she runs in?
Yes. Well, I mean, but he's already put it.
Arms.
He's put it on her arms and then, you know, her nose. So she's sort of say, yeah. But you're absolutely right. You know, I think most brothers would be very worried. You know, this beautiful 14-year-old girl and some strange man comes. Francis.
To be fair, if I were a brother to a sister and someone started talking to her and gave her gold, I probably would try to examine that person to a degree and be like, no, do come in. I mean, now that you're here, come in, sit in my house. Let's see what's happening here.
That's actually a very good point.
I mean, he does seem a bit suspicious. It's probably what I would do, because there's, if the history of love stories tells us anything, is that forbidding teenagers from falling in love is the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, that's also true.
Engage with it and take it seriously and talk to it. Although I have to say, it does seem a bit like Laban is very eager to get his sister married off. Which he might be. If his father had just died, he would try to get everyone's affairs in order, which would entail getting the sister married off to a good husband. And if this person comes in and gives her gold right away, he'd be like, oh yeah, cool, seems legit.
Well, I suppose the thing is that, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It could be, you know, when he says, you know, when he saw the gold, it's not necessarily that, you know, oh, gold, goody. It could well be he sees the gold, and that's what kind of worries him, which is why he comes running out and, you know, saying, look, you know, let's what's this about? You know, come in, let me find out more about you, sort of thing.
The servant clearly makes his pitch by emphasizing how rich Abraham is.
Yes.
You know, that Isaac is the only heir, like we're not going to talk about Ishmael, and he's been given everything and he's really wealthy. So
yes,
the way that he's making his sales pitch, I guess, doesn't seem like he's trying to assuage any fears for her safety. It's all about the money or the wealth.
That's right. That's right.
He does make a point, though, of wanting to first make his pitch before he takes any food from them, before he is received and is like, oh yeah, you've been, you know, very hospitable to me and everything.
Yeah.
First, he wants to make very clear what his intentions are, which is kind of honorable, I think.
Right. Now, this is the bit that the rabbis take up. The fact, you see, you've got the next bit that Laban and Bethuel answered, the matter was decreed by Adonai, we cannot speak of you bad and good. Here is Rebekah before you, okay? The fact Bethuel is mentioned there, but he doesn't, you know, he wouldn't eat until he told his tale. The story, the Midrash pick up is that Laban decided he was going to kill this servant. He didn't want him to take her. So he poisoned the food and put it in front of him, because basically he said, look, if he's got this gold for, you know, how much more is he carrying? And, you know, the camels look nice too. We could have it all. So he decides to kill him, poisons his food, puts it in front of him. And then, of course, the servant says, I'm not going to eat until I tell you my story. And that somehow, miraculously, the food gets switched. Bethuel gets it instead, has it instead, and that's why he dies. And that's why we don't hear from him anymore after this, which is kind of a neat midrashic way of trying to explain a sort of textual problem that he, you know, now he's there and that then he isn't, and that he has no say in the sort of in the negotiations that go on. So anyway, so you know, Laban and Bethuel answer, the matter was decreed by Adonai. We cannot say for you good or bad. Here is Rebekah. Take her, go. Let her be a wife to your master's son, as Adonai has spoken. Okay. So basically it's saying, okay, you can take her. All right. Then Abraham's servant heard their words. He bowed low to the ground before Adonai. According to this midrash, this is Laban says, yes, you can take her because he knows he's going to be dead within seconds. But then, of course, he doesn't. The servant brought out the objects of silver and gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah. And he gave presents to her brother and her mother, not her father. So, you know, this is kind of where the textual thing becomes a problem. The presents here are within Jewish halachic tradition. This is the mohar, what's known as the bride price, which is again sort of was traditional that, you know, at that point that you would give gifts of considerable value to the intended bride. A lot of what has become Jewish tradition of marriage comes from this story. So then it continues. He and the entourage under him ate and drank, and they spent the night. And when they arose next morning, he said, give me leave to go to my master. But her brother and her mother, see again, no Bethuel here, let the maiden remain with us some 10 days, and then you may go. He said to them, do not delay me now that Adonai has made my errand successful. Give me leave that I may go to my master. And they said, let us call the girl and ask for her reply. And they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I will. So they sent off their sister Rebekah and her nurse along with Abraham's servant and his entourage. Now, any thoughts or comments about this?
She seems quite keen to go. I don't think she was very big in the household there. And now she's going to be a wife of somebody very rich by the looks of things.
Yes, yes. Why is he so eager to go? Why do you think he's so eager to go? Any thoughts?
Well, if they've just poisoned somebody, somebody's just dropped dead.
Yes. You know, if that's the case, certainly. In fact, again, the midrash that you know suggests that, you know, he'd been poisoned. Basically, they're asking him to stay for the shiva, you know, which is about to happen. So again, it's slightly odd that he would want to rush off and not stay out of respect for, you know, Isaac's father-in-law, not to stay for the Shiva. But the fairly obvious answer is, well, yes, but if he suspected foul play, he doesn't want to hang around and have them try and poison him at another time. So, hi, Dimitar, nice to see you. Have you got the texts?
Hi, Rabbi Sibo. I really apologize. I thought it's at 7:30 time.
Oh, okay, don't worry. So long as you've got the text. Have you got the text in front of you? Good. Oh, excellent. Yeah. Right. Okay. So, so anyway, then they bless Rebekah and they say to her, "O sister, may you grow into thousands of myriads. May your descendants seize the gates of their foes." And then Rebekah and her maids arose, mounted the camels, followed the man. So the servant took Rebekah and went his way. Now, there are several interesting points. Firstly, the fact is that both the mother and the brother who's now, you know, the head of the household, and her mother, for whom in, you know, Middle Eastern society, she should have great respect. They don't make the decision. Mm-hmm. They get her to make the decision. Again, you know, if you sort of piece together the fact that, you know, she independently lugs all this water for the camels, that she's the one who is the active person at the well, compared to the stories of Jacob and Moses, where they are the heroes rescuing these poor women who need their help. She's the one who's doing the rescuing. She's the one who brings the man, you know, really to her mother's house. She's the one who decides to go with her. And then finally, in the blessing, may your descendants seize the gates of their foes, is exactly the wording that is used in God's blessing to Abraham after the Akedah, after the binding of Isaac. Sort of being set up as a patriarch here. And particularly if you think about Isaac is never really defined as a character. You know, he's the guy between Abraham and Jacob, but he doesn't himself have any sort of strong story. He digs wells. He doesn't do very much. Emma.
Is it Rebekah who gets the prophecy from God about Jacob and Esau?
Yes.
So it's actually the entire story, the birthright, everything, it passes through her. She is the patriarch.
She is the patriarch. Yes.
And I guess that's what happens when your father tries to sacrifice you. You probably lose interest in being a patriarch.
Well, yes. Just want a quiet life, really. Christina.
Yeah, I'd forgotten how young she's meant to be, because that's not how she comes across.
No.
And you made the point about the blessing. Is there even like an echo of Lech Lecha in her, like, I will go, and
Absolutely.
her just heading off on this crazy journey that, you know, we have, like, even Midrash is trying to come up with a reason of, like, why are they just jumping out like this? Yeah. You know, there does seem to be this parallel. Yes. And like, she go into Sarah's tent as well?
Yes, it's absolutely. I think it's deliberate. It's a deliberate parallel. Abraham was first to leave his family and his home and go to an unknown country, and she's doing exactly the same thing. Yeah. Yeah, great. Okay, so then we have the great love story, I think. Isaac had just come back from the vicinity of Beer Lahai Roi, for he was settled in the region of the Negev. And Isaac went out walking in the field towards evening, and looking up, he saw camels approaching. Raising her eyes, Rebekah saw Isaac. She alighted from the camel, or literally, she actually fell off the camel, and said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field towards us?" And the servant said, "That is my master." So she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac all the things that he had done, and Isaac then brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he took Rebekah as his wife, and Isaac loved her, and thus found comfort after his mother's death. Okay.
That would be the first of the three methods of procuring a marriage.
Yes, yes. And the veiling, of course, is the where we get the whole tradition of bedecken. I mean, interestingly, because, you know, this veil is, women were not veiled traditionally in Judaism until the Roman period. So the question is, what's the veiling? Why is she veiling herself here? And quite often it's seen as possibly it is an indication of a marriage. So that the only time a veil would have been used is as part of a marriage ceremony. Not that there was a marriage ceremony in biblical times. Basically, it was simply that you took the woman into your tent, which is exactly what he does. But putting the veil on might at this point indicate to Isaac that she, you know, who she is. It really, there's a nice sort of parallel between the thing is that, you know, here you don't actually get it here in this translation, I realize, because it says Isaac looking up, saw the camels approaching, and then it says of her raising her eyes. But in the Hebrew, it's exactly the same. Vayisa einav, vatisa einav, they're the same words, but they both looked up. And the fact that they're the exact words are used implies that it happens at the self same time. You know, their eyes met, essentially. So that, you know, it's seen then, depending on how you interpret those last three verbs, you know, that he took her as his wife, and, you know, he brought her into his tent, and he took her as his wife and loved her, is either seen as an argument for arranged marriage, because this was clearly an arranged marriage, and it was family and family connections, which was important, and that this was success, and that love comes after the marriage, and that's the way it should be. Or you see it as simultaneous, that they actually both fell in love the minute they saw each other. And this is simply descriptive of, you know, of what happened. But Christina is absolutely right that this tradition of her paralleling Sarah is seen very much in one of the Midrashim. If you go to Genesis Rabbah 16, I'm trying to work out how far down that, on what page that is. I'll just have to scroll down and find it. If you find it before me, it's on page 4. I think it might be the last. No, it's not the last one. Page 4. Okay. This is the Midrash version of it. Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother. All the days that Sarah was alive, a cloud was connected, literally tied to the entrance of her tent. And when she died, the cloud stopped resting at her tent. When Rebekah came, the cloud returned. All the days that Sarah was alive, the doors were open wide. When she died, the wideness stopped. It's interesting the way they say that. It's kind of as if it wasn't somebody closed the doors, but it's miraculously, you know, it's as if the door shrank. When Rebekah came, the wideness returned. And all the days that Sarah was alive, there was blessing in her dough. And when Sarah died, that blessing ended. When Rebekah came, the blessing returned. All the days that Sarah was alive, there was a candle that would burn from Sabbath Eve to the next Sabbath Eve. And when she died, the candle stopped burning. And when Rebekah came, the week-long flame of the candle returned. And as soon as Isaac saw her, that she did the deeds of her mother, separating her challah in purity, separating her dough in purity, he brought her into the tent. These are references to one of the few mitzvot that specifically women engage in. They are the separation of challah. All these are rabbinic traditions. They're not biblical at all. The thing is, when you make challah for Friday, tradition is to separate some of the dough and burn it in memory of the tithe that was given to the temple. Okay, so this is before sort of centuries before there was a temple, but the rabbis aren't worried about chronology. That's sort of kind of irrelevant. So the fact was that Sarah would separate the dough, and Rebekah also separated the dough. She lit Shabbat candles. Sarah lit Shabbat candles. Not only did she light them, but those candles continued to burn for the entire week. And Rebekah did the same thing. So that's your challah, the separation of the dough, lighting your Shabbat candles. And the third mitzvah upon women, which is mentioned in Mishnah, is family purity. Going to the mikveh, separating from your husband during the time of menstruation, then you go to the mikveh before you return conjugal relations. That's hinted at in this midrash when it says separating her challah in purity, separating the dough in purity. That's your tahara, your purity. So she fulfilled all three requirements, and therefore it says Isaac saw that she was a good, virtuous, obedient Jewish wife, and therefore he brought her into his tent, or into her tent, into Sarah's tent. So she's seen as a sort of kind of fitting wife for Isaac at that, at that point. As I said, the rabbis really like Rebekah. I mean, those of you, and many of you did sort of come to my classes on the 7 prophetesses, where it seemed that a lot of the rabbis were, into really dissing the women and making them, less than prophetic in many ways. But here they seem to really like him. And you find that particularly if you go back to let's see, which midrash are we looking at now? 63:5, we can find it. Yes, it's on page 5. Oh no, sorry, wrong one. I do apologize. That is not the right one. It's 63:4. 63:4. This goes back to the idea that Isaac was 40 years. Rabbi Yitzhak says this is to teach us that he came from Aram Naharaim. Why should Aram Naharaim mean Isaac was 40 years? The question, though, is if it was to teach that he comes from Padan Aram, why say Bethuel the Aramean? Okay. We're talking about Aram is Arab, is the capital of the Arameans. Okay. Aram Naharaim and Padam Aram are meant to be the same place. Okay. In both, they're called Aram. But we are then told that she was the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean and also the sister of Laban the Aramean. Why all these Arameans? If you want to go back to the actual text itself, I'm trying to see where it is. Right at the beginning, I think, isn't it? Yes. No, I think it's in the bit that we don't have. It's a bit right at the beginning, I think. But the point is,
which verse are you looking for, Rabbi Sybil?
I just tried. I can't.
I can read. I have a Torah with me. I can read something if you'd like.
Yes, I'm not entirely sure which verse. I'm sorry, I didn't make a note of the actual verse, which was a bit stupid of me.
It says here it's referring to 25:20.
Right.
Isaac was 40 years old when he took as his wife Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean, of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean.
That's the one. That's it. Yes. Okay. So that's it. Why refer to, why mention that you're mentioning Aramean here 3 times? Okay. You're talking about Padan Aram, which would mean then Bethuel, the Aramean, and Laban, the Aramean. Why mention it so many times? So it says here, it is to teach you that her father was a deceiver. The word in Hebrew is Ramai, okay? So, and her brother was also a deceiver. And all the people in the place were deceitful, okay? So that's why you need it 3 times. Firstly, they came from Aram, which means all the people there. It's a deceitful place. And Bethuel is deceitful, and Laban is deceitful, okay? But this righteous woman who came out from them, what is she to be compared? She is like the rose among thorns, which comes from Song of Songs, okay? And Rabbi Pinchas said, as it is written, he, Jacob, went to Padan Aram, to Laban the Aramean. So he then found himself that the whole population were deceivers. So it wasn't just Laban who deceived him, but the entire population were deceivers. So what that midrash is doing is really putting Rebekah up as, the great virtuous woman who comes from a family that's full of deceit. But of course, what does Rebekah do? Emma.
I think it's interesting that in every generation they go back there, right? Like that Abraham came from there, he left there, he was promised a great nation. If he left there, you leave idolatry behind you, embrace one God, you leave. And in every generation they tell their children, go back and find a wife out of that horrible people that we left. And there must be one good person from among all the it's a very strange thing to keep going back and hoping that they'll be different, or not hoping that they'll be different, but hoping that there'll be an exception.
Well, they do marry into the same family, so I suppose it is that's the family thing that becomes a thing. But what is interesting is that Rivka also is a deceiver. I mean, it's exactly what she does.
And Rachel,
and
sitting,
Rachel, yes, sitting on the
hiding the jewels,
yes. So
and I guess Leah in going along with the old veiling nonsense.
Yes.
They're all deceitful.
They're all deceitful. Christia.
Can I ask a question about the previous midrash where it said there was a cloud over Sarah's tent? Is that referring to like the Shekhinah, like the divine? Okay, thank you.
And it's it actually references the cloud on the tabernacle. It's the divine presence.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So okay. So let's move on to the next story. Oh, we've got a lot to get through. There's a lot in this story, so of course, but let's see.
Is it Genesis 25?
Yes. This is, they're married, Genesis 25, verse 21 to 28. That Isaac pleaded with Adonai on behalf of his wife because she was barren, and Adonai responded to his plea, and his wife Rebekah conceived. Okay? Before we carry on, any thoughts?
I find it slightly worrisome that he essentially saw this strange woman and said, she's exactly like my mom, I'm going to marry her.
But isn't that what people do all the time?
She's childless. The translation I have says childless, not barren, but like Sarah, but he's praying on her behalf, but she's there, unlike Hannah, who prays for herself. Like, here is Rebekah in the previous parsha doing all the action, but he's like praying on her behalf. I don't know.
Yes. It's there is here, if we look at it's interesting because it is the on her behalf is lenocha, which is actually not on her behalf, this translation. I didn't put the Hebrew in simply because it's a matter of space, but I rather wish I had, because I'm sorry. But if you go down now to the Midrash 63:5, if you can find it, which is on page 5. There you've got the Hebrew, firstly of that bit. Yitzchak ladonai lenocha ishta. It can mean opposite his wife, as opposed to on behalf of, which is sort of the understanding here. Isaac entreated Adonai on behalf of his wife, lenocha ishto. This teaches us that Isaac would prostrate there, and she prostrated there. In other words, the two of them were both praying together. And he said, ruler of the universe, all the children that you have promised me, let them be from this righteous woman. And she said the same. So according to this interpretation, she's also praying. And that actually accords much more closely to the Hebrew than this understanding of on her behalf. And again, I think this is an example. There are several that you get through Tanakh of actually lazy translation or assumptive translation. The most famous one is in Kohelet, in Ecclesiastes, to everything there is a season, which is always translated a time to be born, a time to die. That's not what the Hebrew says. The Hebrew says a time to give birth. But because translators for generations have been men and they look at it from their own perspective, that's how they've translated it. And I think the assumption here was too, because Isaac is the one who is mentioned first and Isaac prays, the assumption is he's the one that's doing the praying for her. Whereas actually the Hebrew itself seems to suggest that they are praying opposite each other.
Are there any female translators of the Torah?
Well, there are now.
Yeah.
There are now. But, there hadn't been for a very long time. So that's, so there we have it. Okay. So, so if we carry on then with this, we then have Rebekah, who does then fall pregnant. And this is a very much something that we get a lot. And I don't want to talk about it now because we'll talk about it perhaps more next week, because we are going to run out of time if we're not careful. But anyway, she conceives. They pray and she conceives, which is already an example that, God is involved in all of this. But the children struggle in her womb. And she said, if so, why do I exist? Okay. Lama Anochi. What, why am I? Okay. I don't quite know how you would understand that. I mean, have you any sort of thoughts?
Well, given that her function is to reproduce, and she's not doing that easily, then she might as well not exist. That's her only reason to be alive.
Yeah. So presumably she thinks she's dying.
Could it also, I mean, is there also kind of a promise to her, like there is to Abraham, that she's going to have a role in this covenant? I mean, my sister had twins, so it's a very, very uncomfortable pregnancy. I mean, that's the sort of flippant answer. I mean, my sister said that to me a million times when she was pregnant with twins. But the serious answer is, I mean, I guess there hasn't been a prophecy necessarily yet, but isn't there
is
an
now
implicit prophecy that she's going to be part of carrying on this covenant and making the descendants more more numerous than the stars in the sky and all of that?
It's sort of, yes. Yes. I mean, in a sense, the blessing, we skipped over the blessing, that the blessing, she got the blessing from her mother and Lavan is, I mean, it's not directly from God here, but it's the wording. I mean, I referred to the, exact wording of Abraham's blessing, but this idea that may you be the mother of myriads is very much parallels the sentiment of, you shall be the father of, descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. So it is, yes, she does get that blessing. It seems very, very strongly that she absolutely does. And what happens here, that she she goes and inquires of Adonai, and Adonai answered her and said, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 separate people shall issue from your body, 1 people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Okay? Now, this is where the rabbis have this slight problem. God speaks to her. God speaks to her direct. Okay? Now, our midrash at the beginning said, do not engage in conversation with women. Now, if men shouldn't engage in conversation with women, how much more so should God not engage in conversation with women? Okay? Right, Mark. Mark?
Sorry, it's probably a daft question, but where did she go to inquire from God?
That's not a daft question. It's a very good question. And it's exactly the question that the rabbis ask. And their answer, of course, is no, she doesn't inquire exactly directly to God. She goes through an intermediary. And the intermediary that they have is actually the yeshiva of Shem and Ever. Shem, the son of Noah, the good son of Noah, and his grandson, who was called Ever, set up a yeshiva. So, being a dutiful girl, and, having real problems with her pregnancy, she goes and consults her rabbi, as all good people should do. And so basically, when it says here, he said, meaning God said, it isn't God, it's through the, agency of the rabbi. That's one answer to it. Vivian, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, it's not necessarily that line of argument that if an ordinary man shouldn't speak to a woman, then how much more so God? It could be the other way around. It's because God can cope,
yes.
Ordinary mortal men who haven't got that kind of perfection, we cannot do that.
Okay. We need to look at two different midrashim here. If you look at Midrash Rabbah 45:10, which is the first text on page 5, we're talking about Hagar here, because actually God speaks to 3 women in Torah, in these early stories. The first one is Sarah. He speaks to Sarah when she's eavesdropping at the when he overhears the 3 strangers telling Abraham that he's going to have a child, and she laughs because he's so old. And God, it is one of the strangers is God, who says to her, "Why did you laugh?" And she said, "I didn't." And he says, "You did laugh." Okay, so God is speaking directly, not prophecy here, but God speaks directly to Sarah. But what is much more interesting is the story of Hagar, the Egyptian concubine of Abraham. In the less well-known story of her expulsion, like so many of these stories, there are two different versions. And the version that we have in the first one is it's when she has, when she's pregnant, but before Ishmael is born, Sarah throws her out into the desert. And she's wandering in the desert, and God finds her and basically tells her, go back to Sarah and Abraham. You are going to give birth to a son, and he's going to be, the father of a great nation. And God, God blesses her. Okay, Christina.
Blessing sounds just the same.
Yes.
I have it. The angel of Adonai
Yes.
said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her ill treatment. The angel of Adonai went on to say to her, I will greatly multiply your descendants. They shall be too numerous to count. It sounds just like what said to Abraham and Rebekah.
Yes, we've got it in the text here. It's Genesis 16, verse 7 to 14. We have it there, okay? And what's significant too is she calls the name Be'er Laha Ro'i. Okay, you are El Ro'i, the God who sees me. Okay, and where is it that Isaac had just come back from when he encounters Rebekah? Be'er Laha Ro'i. So it seems to be that there's a sort of, a deliberate kind of connection being made between the two characters here. So, there's absolutely very clear that Hagar is a matriarch, just not a matriarch of our tradition, but she has God's blessing. And Rebekah has the same. So if we look at this Midrash, it's Midrash Rabbah 45:10, which is on that Hagar story. She called on the name of Adonai, who spoke to her, you are El Ro'i, the God who sees me. Rabbi Yehuda bar Simon and Rabbi Yochanan said, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer bar Shimon, the Holy One of Blessing did not grant speaking with women, with the exception of that righteous one, that is Sarah, okay? And even that had a particular reason, okay? That was the reason, I suppose, was that, he didn't like her lying. Okay, Rabbi Abba said in the name of Rabbi Be'eri, how many roundabouts did he did in order to talk to her? He said, no, you did laugh, but it is written, and she called the name of Adonai, who talked to her. You are El Ro'i. This is Hagar, okay? Rabbi Hoshua ben Nehemiah said it was through an angel. But it isn't through an angel. It says, and God said to her. So Rabbi Levi, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, in the name of Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra, said it was through a name. In other words, God didn't speak to her direct. God spoke to her through someone else. And if it wasn't through someone else, it was through sort of kind of, there had to be some kind of agency. They couldn't get their heads around the fact that God could speak direct. Mark.
I've just noticed that Hagar names God.
Yes.
And
yes.
It's the first time I can think of in that type of tales that anybody names God.
Yes. Yes.
So the women are not, in a sense, only recapitulating Eve's story, becoming the mother of.
Yes, and the creator.
They're also, in a sense, recapitulating the fact that Eve is the God-given helper. He's the one who needs the help. She's she's fine. He's the one who needs that. And Hagar names God. It just sort of struck me there.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's great. Okay. So anyway, we must sort of move on very quickly now. If we move on to, of course, the twins are born. We know that they struggle. We know that Isaac favors Esau. If we go back to the text, yes. Let's see that. Yes, Isaac favored Esau because he had a taste for gain, but Rebekah loved Jacob. The tradition usually is that, Isaac's belief was somewhat sort of blinded by the fact that, he was being fed by his older son. There are many more very interesting interpretations, but I don't think we've got time really to go into them now. Whereas, of course, Rebekah loves Jacob. Now, Rebekah would seem to have prior knowledge because of the prophecy. The prophecy that, two nations are in your womb, two separate people shall issue from your body, one people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Doesn't actually say which is which. It's that the older shall serve the younger. One of the questions is, it doesn't, the might, one shall be mightier than the other, could be either. The older shall serve the younger. Again, if you think about the nature of their birth, they're fighting in the womb as to which one comes out first. Jacob is hard on the heel of Esau, trying to pull him back because he should come out first. So there is this sort of kind of ambiguity as to which one is actually the one that is being promised. But of course, Rebekah believes that it is Isaac. It is Jacob. So if we go to Genesis 27, when Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see, he called his older son Esau and said to him, "My son," and he said, "Here I am." And he said, "I am old now, and I do not know how soon I may die. Take your gear, your quiver and bow, and go out into the open and hunt me some game. Then prepare a dish for me, such as I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my innermost blessing before I die." Rebekah had been listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. And when Esau had gone out into the open to hunt game to bring home, and Rebekah said to her son, "I've overheard your father speaking to your brother Esau. Bring me some game and prepare a dish for me to eat, that I may bless you with Adonai's approval before I die. Now listen, my son, carefully as I instruct you. Go to the flock and fetch me 2 choice kids, and I will make them a dish for your father, such as he likes. Then take it to your father to eat, in order that he may bless you before he dies." And Jacob answered his mother Rebekah, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am smooth-skinned. If my father touches me, I shall appear to him as a trickster and bring upon himself a curse, not a blessing." But his mother said to him, "Your curse, my son, be upon me. Just do as I say and go and fetch them for me." Okay, so I'll just stop there for a bit. Any thoughts or comments so far?
It's not a particularly deep comment, but it just strikes me as very bad parenting. Why do they play off the brothers so much against each other? Yeah. Is it just as a narrative device to make an interesting story?
Well, I think it's rather more than that. I mean, I think the bad parenting continues, doesn't it? I mean, it started with Isaac and Ishmael, and it goes on then. Yeah. You end up with Joseph and his brothers. It's each generation repeats the problems of the
you've got that repetition of an underdog, haven't you? In the way that Ishmael is the underdog in that pairing, and then this one, is it Esau? No,
Yes.
Jacob is the.
Well,
no, Esau's the underdog.
Esau's the one who gets done out of everything, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's
some connection with Cain and Abel.
That's an interesting one.
One's the farmer, one's the hunter. They're also brothers. Isn't there also favoritism there as well?
Yes, except, well, I mean, it's not so much the hunter, but you have your shepherds and, you know, the sort of pastoralists and agriculturalists in the Cain and Abel story. But it's the shepherd and the meat eater who wins out on that one, because God accepts the meat sacrifice and not the grain sacrifice. So it doesn't quite sort of play out quite the same way. There's the women's Torah commentary has a very interesting sort of psychological take on this one, which suggests that, you know, Isaac, being something of a nebbish, really admired Esau, this strong hunter. You know, he was everything that he wasn't. And he was just so proud to have produced this real sort of, you know, strong man of the fields. Whereas Rebekah, as a very strong character, rather favored the quieter Jacob, who stayed at home because he was much more malleable and he did as she said, as witnessed here. Which is kind of a very different from the traditional way that we look at it. But does kind of rather fit in the fact that, you know, it appears that Rebekah and Isaac are not actually talking to each other. Why else would she be eavesdropping on this? I mean, you could argue that, well, you know, that was just the nature of society, that women were not part of these decisions, and it was his decision, and it was time to come and bless his son, and he was going to do that. Why should she know? But the fact that she's sort of kind of listening in seems to suggest that that's a habit of hers.
I mean, Isaac must have been in particularly bad health if he doesn't recognize which one of his children is kind of coming to visit him. It's not just a case of that he's withering away. It sounds like he's blind at this point, doesn't it?
Yes, he's absolutely blind.
I'll have to find what you're referring to, because I'm afraid I haven't read it yet. But I did hear it says, it basically is talking about how if it had been in her power to decide who got the blessing, but her like geriatric husband, you know, she doesn't have that authority, so she has to work through him, albeit not with his consent. But they make this comment that subterfuge is what women and men in positions of powerlessness or limited power use to meet their rightful needs. And I like that, because it's like the ends can still be righteous. And we could talk about Esther, like there's so many characters here that, you know, if you're in the subaltern position, you use what agency you have. And I don't know, maybe getting hung up on the subterfuge, we miss the larger like righteousness, if we agree that her purpose is righteous.
Well, I mean, yes, you can certainly take it that way. Point is, though, that this subterfuge then continues, you know, because Jacob tricks and is tricked, you know, throughout all his relations with Laban, and then ultimately gets tricked about the fate of Joseph. In a sense, you know, it's sort of kind of set up that this is something that becomes a recurring pattern throughout. It's not always the powerless who do the tricking. You know, it seems to be more, I'm not sure that it is something that is actually, as far as the text is concerned, seen as something that is acceptable. Except, I suppose you can say that Rebekah is the only person who knows God's intentions. But the question is, should she just have left it to God to sort out? Was she making things worse by taking it on herself to do God's work for God, or was actually that what she was supposed to do? And the rabbis do debate this, but they come back to this thing where she says that your curse be upon me. You know, if it goes wrong, you know, the punishment should be mine because it was my idea, not yours. And she is punished in that he then has to leave. And he has to, you know, he has to flee, and she never sees him again. She dies without ever seeing him again. So she does seem to have planned the whole thing, though, because when afterwards, looking at Genesis very quickly now, try to get to the back, you know, Esau is furious when he finds out he's being tricked. And when the words of the older son Esau were reported to Rebekah, she sent for her younger son Jacob and said to him, your brother Esau's concerning himself by planning to kill you. Now listen to me. Flee at once to Haran, back to the family there, to my brother Laban. Stay with him a while until your brother's fury subsides, until your brother's anger against you subsides, and he forgets what you've done to him. Then I will fetch you from there. So let me not lose you both in one day. So Rebekah said to Isaac, Rebekah said to Isaac, and this is the first time she speaks to him, you know, really since the sort of kind of the beginning of this story, we had no direct speech. She says, I'm disgusted with my life because of the Hittite women. These are the women that Esau have married. They, you know, Esau married Canaanites, and they are trouble for her. I wanted to go into why they're trouble, but we don't have time, I'm afraid. Okay, but she says then, if Jacob marries a Hittite woman like these from among the native women, what good will life be for me? It seems a parallel to that first question about, you know, the twins in her womb. Yeah, sorry. Someone say something? No, okay. So anyway, this is a sort of good excuse. She manages to get Jacob away, but her punishment is that she never sees him again. Okay. Now, what there is an interesting, and I think this is the last midrash, just to show again how some of the midrashim do try and equalize things. The last one, I think, Bereshit Rabbah 75:8 at the foot of the page. Okay. When Isaac gives the blessing in the text, when, you know, thinking it's Isaac and he's tricked into giving it to Jacob, the midrash says that Rebekah also blessed him, as it is written, O you who dwell in the hidden places of the Most High, and that is said, for he will order his angels to guard you. And then after that, God also gives a blessing, and then Abraham concludes his blessing. So according to this midrash, it is not just, Jacob does not just receive his father's blessing, but also his mother's blessing and a blessing from God. And of course, the blessing of Rebekah is absolutely becomes true, because angels accompany Jacob on his journey to Haran, and they accompany him on his journey back, so that, you know, that part of the blessing comes true. So what it seems to me, what we have with Rebekah is a very, you know, she is very much seen, takes on the role of a patriarch in much of what she does. If we were to give her 3 phrases from Pirkei Avot, what would be the phrases how would you describe her? Just to remind you, you have firstly her encounter with Abraham's servant, offering, you know, him a drink and to the camels, her decision to leave and go to this unknown place, then inquiring of God praying for a child, possibly with Isaac, inquiring of God and receiving the prophecy, which she knows, but nobody else seems to know about the fate of her children. Then she eavesdrops and arranges the switch to get Jacob to take Esau's place. And then says, basically, your curse shall be on me. And then finally, she speaks to Isaac and says, I don't like Esau's wives. Jacob needs to find himself a better one. Send him to Haran, which of course Isaac does. Okay, Chris.
I mean, she definitely it seems like she is not only the recipient of the blessing to Abraham, but then she chooses to pass it on.
Yes.
So I guess take matters into your own hands. Don't wait for a man to do it. Get it done yourself.
Right, yes. Okay. Anything else? Thoughts?
I see her as, I mean, she starts off being sort of so full of hope, doesn't she, for a new life, and then I think, like, she just seems to be a little bit disillusioned with because why would you not tell your husband that that prophecy, which she obviously didn't share because he liked Esau better, which is what you normally do. I don't know. I find her a little bit of a sad character, I think.
Yeah.
Disappointed with what happened.
I suppose, yes. I mean, you go off to a strange place, marry somebody you don't know. Could have been full of high hopes, and she could well have been very sort of disillusioned. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, think about it. If you have any ideas through the week, let me know. Mark, you going to say something? Because you unmuted yourself. Okay. Well, we'll leave it there. Next week we will look at Rachel, but we'll look at Rachel and Leah, because they do relate off each other quite a lot. But so I look forward to seeing you then. Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I think Deborah had something to say.
Oh, Deborah,
and
right.
Mark as well.
Oh, yes, Mark.
Deborah's just gone now.
Oh.
Okay. Sybil, can you give us the details of the Women's Torah commentary, please?
Oh, right. You've got it in front of you. Can you do it, Christy? Because you've got it there.
I could not recommend it more. It was my birthday present, and I've been trying to keep up with the parsha, and it's changed my life.
It's UAHC that publish it.
Is that who published it here? In the US, it's CCAR. It's CCAR.
Oh, it's the same. Sorry, it's the same.
Okay.
UAHC is the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. Yeah, but yeah, CCAR.
Who's the editor and what's
Oh,
the
it's like
publication?
the Congress of American Rabbis.
Yes, it's a reform.
It's RMRJ. It's the American version of the Movement for Reform Judaism. Like they also publish our Siddur stuff.
I mean, I don't know who the editor actually is.
Oh, it's Tamara Cohn Eskenazi, who's like an amazing scholar, and Andrea Weiss.
Weiss, yes, that's right. Yes.
Does it have more than one edition, or does it?
No, it's the only edition.
What year was the publication?
The only problem is, Mark, is that we got a copy of it, or I got a copy
2008.
I got a copy of it while I was in the US, and getting it to the UK isn't very easy.
I think Manor House Books probably stock it.
That's a good point.
They don't.
It's okay. I've got American contacts. They can bring one
Okay.
over when they come.
Right. Good.
Yeah, you can order it from the CCAR website, and they'll mail it to you. Yeah.
But if
Thank
you have
very
American
much.
contacts, then
Yes, there's much cheaper that way.
Thanks.
Okay.
So we're not here next week, are we?
That's right. No class next week. My apologies. Yeah, no class next week.
I'll put that in the email.
Yes, do.
Thank
So
you.
we'll continue again.
Can I have
in
a signed
2 weeks' time.
reading? Should we just go ahead and read a few parashot ahead before we talk about
if you would like to. I mean, you know, we are looking at Rachel, so Rachel and Leah as effectively, but largely Rachel. It's not quite as much text, although it's very, very interesting, and the Midrashim are really, really interesting on that. But if you want to read the, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you very much.
I'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.